They said my nursing degree was a waste of a scholarship. They said I was reaching above my station. They said Eli wasn't good enough, that the wedding I was planning was embarrassing, and that I should be grateful anyone wanted me at all. That was my mother talking, at Sunday dinner, in front of my aunt, my cousin, and my grandmother, who sat at the end of the table and said nothing. I was 26 years old, and I had heard some version of that speech my whole life. Let me back up. I grew up in a 4-bedroom house in Dayton, Ohio, the kind of house that looked fine from the outside and felt like a courtroom on the inside. My mother was the judge, my older sister was the favorite witness, and I was whatever the court decided I was that week. Ungrateful, too sensitive, too ambitious, not ambitious enough. My father left when I was 9. Not dramatically. He just started staying at work later and later until one day he didn't come home at all. My mother never forgave him, and she made sure I knew that whatever parts of me looked like him were the wrong parts. My sister, 2 years older, the kind of pretty that my mother called effortless and I called photographed from every angle since birth, had always been the one the family orbited. She got the sweet 16 party, she got the car for graduation, she got the big Easter basket and the birthday dinner at the steakhouse, and the way my aunt would say her name when she walked into a room like an announcement. I got, well, at least you're smart. And I was. I worked hard in school because it was the one place where the rules made sense and the results were mine. I got into the nursing program at Ohio State on a partial scholarship. I worked 2 jobs to cover the rest. My mother told everyone nursing the way you'd say someone was doing pottery, like it was a hobby, a phase, something to humor until I figured out what I actually wanted. I graduated with a 3.7 GPA and a job offer at a level I trauma center in Columbus. My mother came to the graduation. She wore a nice dress and smiled for pictures. In the car on the way home, she said, "Just so you know, your cousin Becca is starting her MBA in the fall." I looked out the window and said nothing. That was the year I met Eli. I met him at the hospital, which sounds like the beginning of a soap opera, but it wasn't. He wasn't a doctor sweeping through the halls in scrubs. He was sitting in the waiting room at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, holding a paper cup of coffee with both hands, looking like he hadn't slept in 3 days. His business partner had come in with chest pain. He'd driven 2 hours from Cincinnati because, as he told me later, he didn't know who else to call. I wasn't even supposed to be in that waiting room. I was coming off a 12-hour shift, and I'd left my jacket at the nurse's station and had to double back. He asked me if I knew anything about the patient. He'd given the name. I told him I wasn't on that case, but that I'd find out what I could. I did. His partner was fine. He thanked me with a handshake that lasted a beat too long, and I thought about him all the way home. He called the hospital 3 days later and left a message with my name on it. He asked if I wanted to get coffee. I almost didn't go. I almost talked myself out of it the way I'd talked myself out of most things that felt too good to be real. But I went, and he walked me to my car and said, "I want to see you again." Not like a question and not like a line, just like a fact he was stating out loud. His was Eli Hart. He was 31. He had started a software logistics company out of his apartment 5 years earlier and had grown it into something I didn't fully understand until much later, when I Googled him at midnight and sat with my hand over my mouth for a full minute. But I didn't know any of that on that first coffee date. I just knew he listened when I talked, remembered what I said, and showed up exactly when he said he would. We dated for 2 years. He met my family at Thanksgiving the first year. He brought a bottle of good wine and a pie from the best bakery in Columbus and complimented my mother's house genuinely and specifically. She smiled at him with her company smile and asked what he did. He said he ran a tech company. She said, "Oh, like it?" He said something like that. My aunt asked if it was stable. My cousin, my sister's husband's younger brother, who had just been promoted to assistant manager at an auto parts store, laughed and said, "Tech is rough, man. Lots of guys think they're going to make it and then crash out." Ellie nodded pleasantly. He didn't say anything to defend himself. He didn't need to. He just refilled my mother's wine glass and asked my grandmother how long she'd lived in Dayton, and my grandmother talked for 40 minutes about the neighborhood she grew up in, and Eli listened to all of it. In the car ride home, he held my hand and said, "They love you, they just don't know how to show it." I wanted to believe him. I tried. We got engaged on a Saturday in March, in the kitchen of his condo, which is not the romantic story people expect, but it's the true one. He'd made breakfast and there was flour on his shirt, and the ring was in his jacket pocket, and he'd forgotten to account for the flour when he reached for it, so he handed it to me with a white fingerprint on the box, and I cried before he even got the question out. I said yes before he finished asking. I called my mother that afternoon. She said, "Well, you're sure?" I said I was sure. She said, "It's just, you haven't known him that long. 2 years isn't very long." I reminded her that she and my father had gotten engaged after 14 months, and she told me that was completely different, and I knew better than to push it further. My sister called me an hour later. She said congratulations, and she meant it, I think, or at least part of her did. Then she said, "Mom's worried you're rushing." Then she said her own anniversary party was in June, and she hoped our wedding wouldn't overlap because the whole family would already be stretched thin. Her anniversary party, for her 5th year. At a rented event space in the suburbs with a caterer and a photo booth and a playlist her husband had spent 3 weeks on. He'd been talking about it since January. I told her we were thinking fall. She said, "Oh, good," and I could hear the relief. The wedding planning started fine and then got not fine, the way things do. Eli and I had agreed on something real and personal, not a ballroom, not a hotel package, not 150 people we barely knew. We wanted something meaningful. We rented a restored farmhouse venue outside of Columbus, the kind of place with exposed wood beams and string lights and a garden that turned gold in October. We put down a deposit, we hired a photographer we loved, we kept the guest list under 60. My mother came to visit in July. She stood in my kitchen and flipped through the venue photos on my tablet and said, "This is very rustic." I said we liked rustic. She said, "I just want you to have a real wedding." She put the tablet down and said, "Sweetheart, I'm your mother, and I'm saying it's because I love you. Are you sure you don't want to wait and do something more substantial? Because this looks like it could be someone's backyard." It was not someone's backyard. I had paid a deposit on a 19th century farmhouse with 4 acres of grounds and a chef who had trained in New York. But I understood what she meant. She meant it wasn't the wedding she would have wanted. She meant it wasn't the wedding my sister had, with the 12-person bridal party and the hotel ballroom and the ice sculpture. I said, "Mom, we're happy with what we've chosen." She left 2 hours later and called my aunt from the car. I know because my aunt texted my sister, and my sister texted me. "Mom's upset about the venue. She thinks you're settling." I set my phone face down on the counter and made dinner. August brought the RSVP deadline. My aunt called to say she and my uncle couldn't make it. There was a conflict, she didn't specify what. My cousin and his wife sent their regrets by text. My sister said she'd come but that her husband might not be able to get away from work. My mother said she would come, she just needed to figure out logistics. Eli's family was flying in from 3 different states. I sat with the RSV spreadsheet one night while Eli was on a call in his office and I counted. His side, 22 confirmed. My side, my mother, possibly, and my grandmother, who was 81 and had already asked me twice what month the wedding was in. I didn't cry. I just closed the spreadsheet and went to bed. 3 weeks before the wedding, my mother called. She said she'd been thinking, and she wanted to talk to me about something, and her voice had that specific careful quality that meant she had rehearsed what she was going to say. She said, "I've been talking to your aunt and we're both a little concerned that you're making a permanent decision based on a relationship that the family hasn't had a lot of time to evaluate." I said, "You've met Eli multiple times over 2 years." She said, "I know, but there are things about a person you can't know until you really know them." I said, "What does that mean?" She said, "I just think you should be careful. He runs some kind of small company and you don't really know how stable that is. Your sister's husband has a real career with benefits and a pension." I said, "Mom." She said, "I'm just saying." I said, "I'm getting married in 3 weeks. Is there something specific you need from me right now? Or are you calling to tell me you think I'm making a mistake?" A long pause. She said, "I just don't want you to be embarrassed." I hung up. Not angrily. I just ended the call, set the phone on the coffee table, and sat very still for a moment. Then I went and found Eli and told him what she'd said, and he sat next to me on the couch and didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then he said, "Do you want to uninvite her?" I thought about it. I genuinely thought about it. I said, "No, I want her to come. I want her to see it." He looked at me for a moment and then he smiled, and it was the kind of smile that meant he understood exactly what I meant. The week before the wedding, my sister texted to say she and her husband were actually not going to be able to make it. Work conflict for him, she said, and she didn't want to come alone to a wedding, which, I didn't fully parse that sentence until later, when I was too angry to think about it calmly. My mother texted 2 days later, "Still planning to come but might be late. Don't worry about saving me a seat up front." I didn't respond. The night before the wedding, Eli and I sat on the back porch of the farmhouse with two of his college friends and a bottle of good bourbon and talked until almost midnight. His college friend's wife, a woman named Priya, wait, no, a woman named Shaw, who taught high school English in Denver, told me I had a great face and asked if I'd ever considered modeling, which I hadn't, but I laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that comes from somewhere real. I fell asleep that night, feeling lighter than I had in months. The morning of the wedding was October, golden and sharp the way Ohio sometimes gets before the cold comes in. The photographer arrived at 8 a.m. Eli's mother helped me button the back of my dress and she cried a little and apologized for crying, and I told her not to apologize. Eli's sister stood in the doorway with a glass of champagne and said, "You look ridiculous," which was her way of saying I looked beautiful and I knew it. My mother arrived at 10:47, 13 minutes before the ceremony. She was wearing a navy blue suit I hadn't seen before. She hugged me briefly and said, "You look nice," and looked around the venue with an expression I recognized, the one where she was recalibrating her opinion while keeping her face neutral. I walked down the aisle to a song Eli and I had picked together, something quiet and real, not a wedding march. His college friend played acoustic guitar. The light was the gold hour kind that falls sideways through tall windows. Eli stood at the end of the aisle, and his face when he saw me did something I will never forget and can't describe exactly. My grandmother sat in the front row next to his mother. She held a tissue the entire ceremony and didn't use it until the vows. My mother sat 2 rows back. I could see her in my peripheral vision. She was watching. I said my vows. Eli said his. The officiant, a friend from his graduate school days, made a joke about the flower on the engagement ring box, and the guests laughed. I cried. Eli cried a little, which he had not anticipated and which made me love him even more. We were married. The reception was exactly what we'd imagined and better than I'd hoped. The chef's food was extraordinary. The string lights came on at dusk. The dancing started 20 minutes after dinner and didn't stop. Eli's extended family were warm and funny and treated me like I'd always been part of the picture. My mother ate dinner with my grandmother and my aunt, who had ultimately, actually, come after all, having resolved whatever conflict she'd cited in August. She drank 2 glasses of wine and did not dance. She watched. At some point late in the evening, she found me near the bar and touched my arm and said, "This is actually lovely." And I could hear in her voice that she was surprised, that it had been better than she'd expected, better than she'd told her friends and my aunt it would be, and the surprise itself, that she had expected so little and still been wrong, was something I filed away quietly. I said, "Thank you for coming." She said, "Of course. I'm your mother." I smiled and went back to my husband. The rest is the part my family didn't expect. 3 months after the wedding, Eli's company was acquired. I don't want to say by whom, because it's not relevant, and Eli prefers privacy around the details. What I can say is that the number involved was significant. The kind of number that takes your breath away in a conference room and makes very smart people in very expensive suits stop talking. The deal closed on a Thursday. On Friday, Eli came home, we ordered pizza, and he sat across from me on the kitchen floor, which is where we ate when we didn't feel like adults, and he told me the number. I put my pizza slice down. I said, "Say it again." He said it again. I said, "Eli." He said, "I know." We sat there for a while. He said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to keep working. I like my job." He said, "Okay." I said, "I want to keep our apartment for a while before we think about houses." He said, "Okay." I said, "I want to call my grandmother." He said, "Okay." I did not call my mother, not that night. The news broke publicly about 2 weeks later. Not our names. Eli had structured things carefully, and our names were not in the press release. But in a specific Ohio family network, word moves in particular ways. My aunt has a neighbor who works in finance. My cousin's wife follows certain business news accounts. These things get connected. My mother called on a Tuesday morning while I was between patients. I let it go to voicemail. She called again that afternoon, and again that evening. The voicemail she left said, "Honey, I've been hearing some things and I just want to talk. Call me back when you can. I love you." My sister texted, "Mom says you won't call her back. Are you okay? Also, congratulations, I think. I heard about Eli's company. That's amazing. I'm sorry we missed the wedding. I really am." I read that text 3 times. My aunt sent a card in the mail. A physical card, handwritten, which she had not done since my nursing school graduation. It said she was so proud of me and that family was everything, and that she hoped we could all get together soon. I put the card on my kitchen counter and looked at it for a few days. I thought about my mother's voice on the phone the night she told me my wedding venue looked like a backyard. I thought about my sister texting me that the family was stretched thin because of her anniversary party. I thought about my aunt's empty RSVP slot and my cousin's text message regrets and the whole front section of seats on my side of the ceremony that had been my family's to fill and weren't. I thought about Eli's mother, who had flown from Portland and helped button my dress. I thought about my grandmother, who had held her tissue for the entire ceremony. I thought about what I actually needed from the people who had not been there. I called my mother back on a Thursday. I had written down what I wanted to say, not because I needed a script, but because I wanted to be sure I didn't lose myself in her voice, in the particular way she spoke that had always made me feel like I was both too much and not enough at the same time. She answered on the first ring. She said, "Oh, thank goodness. I've been worried about you." I said, "I know you've been calling." She said, I heard about Eli's company, and I wanted to make sure you were doing okay. It must have been a lot to process." I said, "Mom, I'm fine, we're great." She said, I know. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry I wasn't more supportive." About the wedding, I think I let my own ideas about things cloud my judgment. "Your wedding was beautiful, from the photos." From the photos, she had seen photographs on Facebook. From Eli's sister's account, I said, "You were there." She said, "I know, but I wasn't fully present. I was in my head, and I'm sorry for that." I had practiced this moment. I had thought about what grace looks like and whether it was something I owed and what it would cost me. I said, "I appreciate you saying that." She said, "I'd love to have you both over for Christmas. Your sister will be there. And your aunt, maybe. It would be so good for us all to be together." And there it was. The speed of the transition, the apology that was really a door that swung open directly into a request. "Come to Christmas, bring Eli. Let the family recalibrate around this new information about who you've become." I said, "I'll talk to Eli about our plans for the holidays." She said, of course, but I hope you'll come." I said, "Mom, I love you, I'll be in touch." I got off the phone and sat at my kitchen table and felt something settle in me that I don't have an exact word for. Not anger, not sadness. More like resolution. Like a question that had been open my entire life had finally closed, quietly, in a way no one else would hear. We did not go for Christmas. We went to Portland with Eli's family, and his mother made the kind of holiday meal that takes 3 days and fills every inch of a house with warmth and argument and laughter. And I sat at that crowded table and felt, for maybe the first time in my adult life, entirely at ease. My grandmother called on Christmas morning. We talked for an hour. She told me she had sat up late after the wedding looking at the venue photos I'd texted her, and she thought it was the most beautiful wedding she'd ever attended, and she had attended many. I told her I loved her. She said, "I know, sweetheart. I know. My mother texted on Christmas afternoon, 'Merry Christmas, we miss you.'" I sent back a heart emoji. That was all I had. My sister texted separately, "I owe you a real conversation. Not now, but sometime." I wrote back, "Whenever you're ready, I mean that, I do." Not because I've forgotten the text about the anniversary party, or the relief in her voice when I said we were thinking fall, but because she is my sister and some doors I want to leave open, just not flung wide, not unconditionally. It has been almost a year since the wedding now. Eli and I bought a house last spring, nothing ostentatious, just something with a yard big enough for a garden and a porch big enough to eat breakfast on. I still work at the hospital. I changed units. I'm in the pediatric ICU now, which is the hardest and most important thing I have ever done with my hands. I go home some nights gutted and go back the next morning because the work matters and I know it matters and that is enough. My mother has called 6 times since Christmas. I have answered 4. We are in a kind of slow renegotiation, the terms of which I haven't fully set yet. She is trying. I can see it. Whether trying is enough and what enough looks like, that's the question I'm still working out. My aunt came to visit in the spring, unannounced, which was characteristically her. But she brought flowers and coffee and stood for 2 hours and we talked the way I had always wanted to talk with her when I was younger and couldn't. Her visit was the first time I truly felt something thaw. My cousin sent a text in February that said, "I heard about everything. Congrats. Sorry I was a jerk at Thanksgiving." He was more than a jerk at Thanksgiving. But I wrote back, "Appreciate that. Some things I am still processing. What I know is this. I am married to a man who drove 2 hours at 2 a.m. because his friend needed him, who remembered every word I said on our first date, who stood at the end of an aisle in October light with flowers somewhere in his memory and watched me walk toward him like I was the only fixed point in the room. I know that no one in my family who questioned that, who looked at what we were building and saw something embarrassing, something less than, something not worth the plane ticket or the cleared Saturday, was seeing clearly. I know that I was not the joke of the family. I know that I was never reaching above my station. I know now that I was always exactly where I was supposed to be. And I know that when my mother finally texted me after the news broke, when my aunt sent her handwritten card, when my cousin typed out his apology, when my sister said she was sorry they missed it, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt quiet and very clear. And I thought, I built something real. I built it with someone real. And whether any of you came to see it or not, it stands. It still stands.